Would you donate money to Walter White? He seems to be a good man who has found himself in a difficult life situation, a loving father, a caring husband, and a talented teacher. He just seems to need help. To be sure, anyone who has seen the show knows who Walter White really is. An extraordinary chemist who developed a unique formula of blue methamphetamine, a brutal killer ready to end those who stand in his way, and the owner of a drug empire. We saw with our own eyes how an ordinary schoolteacher was transformed into a violent monster. Walter died before the police could catch him, and he took all his accomplishments and sins with him to his grave. Did I reach my potential? Did I get what I really deserve? Are the questions Walter asks himself during the last year of his life, when he learns of the dreaded diagnosis of inoperable lung cancer. We'll help him answer these questions and find out what makes Breaking Bad truly unique. What feelings guided Walter along his journey, and finally, was Walter a violent man from the beginning, or did he become so under the pressure of circumstance? According to series creator Vince Gilligan, the idea came to him in a moment of desperation. He needed money and could not find a job. Apparently for the same reason, at the beginning of the story, we also see Walt in a desperate situation. At that time, the difficult financial situation was experienced by many, if not all. In 2008, the global economic crisis sharply manifested itself. Many television companies did not dare to take on the implementation of the series. Someone suggested making the main character not a drug manufacturer, but a counterfeiter, as this topic was much less acute. However, the series still hit the screens from the first day, was a huge success, which only grew, and it is not surprising because it has a great artistic value. Needless to say, how well chosen locations, actors, and events. Breaking Bad may be said to have been made according to Alfred Hitchcock's dramaturgical precept. A movie must begin with an earthquake, and then the tension must build up. You can find references to other significant works in the series. Thanks to the movie The Godfather, the language of cinema has fixed on oranges as a symbol of impending death. The plot of Breaking Bad is reminiscent of the plot of The Godfather. A man who did not intend to become part of the criminal world eventually became his head. Breaking Bad is full of interesting dramaturgical and visual solutions in the hands of the creators of the series. Even a simple flashing light bulb on the fire alarm becomes a metaphor for the state of mind of the main character. At this moment, Walter feels depressed. The relationship of the family is strained and his life is threatened by Gustavo Fring. He is still alive but does not feel alive, so the light bulb goes on and off. What exactly attracts us to all the rising? First of all is the fact that the creators of the series masterfully control our feelings and attention. They literally challenge us. In the first season, Walter appears to us as a good but weak-willed man. The students at school do not respect him. He is humiliated by them. He can barely make ends meet and has to work at the car wash as well. Walter's wife, Skylar, is more of an authority than he is. At the beginning of the first episode, Walter is standing in front of them literally in his underwear, completely confused and defenseless. After this, we learn Walter's diagnosis and mentally wish him victory. We want him to assert himself, to stop enduring humiliation. At this point, we can find an excuse for what he has done. He wants to earn money for the family because he is afraid that after he dies they will not be able to provide for themselves. Walter wants to give his family the best. We can understand Walter's sincere motivation, so the writers of the show bind us to him, make us associate ourselves with him and empathize. A lot of us, if we haven't been humiliated, feel like we're not getting enough out of life and could be getting more by showing strength of character. Well then, in the second, third, and fourth seasons, we follow Walter's transformation and see what terrible things he is capable of doing to achieve his goal. The authors test us and ask how long we can empathize with Walter next, which will be the final point for us.at. First, Walter kills out of self-defense. But then he does it deliberately to take out those who pose a threat. Walter deliberately causes an accident so Hank can't get into the laundry room. He sets off an explosion at the nursing home to kill Fring. Even though Walter hired assassins for Jesse, they get Hank and his partner killed. Almost all of the events shown in the series were caused by Walter becoming part of the drug business. Walter could have saved Jane but did not. Her father went mad with grief and made a fatal mistake that led to the collision of the planes. At the end of season 5, we see Walter weak and vulnerable again, losing everything he fought for and hiding from justice. The authors again ask us whether we empathize with Walter now that we know what kind of man he really is. Can we find a justification for his actions? Can we forgive him? The series constantly holds our attention, mostly at the expense of the contradictory acts, and the most contradictory of them all is undoubtedly done by Walter. He has surpassed Gustavo Fring in the level of cruelty, but his empire has collapsed. Walter and Heisenberg. Walter is a man who has been addicted to blue meth more than anyone else, but who has never used it. To understand what drove Walter's change, we need to rewind time back to the events of the show in the past. Walter is a hopeful young scientist and founder of a startup. Along with his college colleague and friend, Elliot, Walter was awarded the Nobel Prize. At the time, he was having an affair with Gretchen. Later, Walter broke up with Gretchen and left the company. But why? Because everything was going well. What exactly went wrong? Walter broke up with Gretchen because of his feelings of inferiority. Next to Gretchen and her family, Walter felt like he could never live up to their high standards and their financial status. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. The prospect of being in Gretchen's shadow forever terrified him. Walter sold his share for $5,000, which was a lot of money to him at the time, but later on Walt and the sum of $5 million seems like pennies, and Walter wants to earn as much as he lost by leaving gray matter. Walter was convinced that he had been forced to sell his share and kicked out. And Gretchen and Elliot had appropriated the results of his scientific work and become rich. Walter secretly blamed Gretchen and Elliot for his financial problems, denying the fact that he had left the company on his own.
What happened? Because this isn't you.
What would you know about me, Gretchen?
Therein lies the main inner drama of Walt. He cannot admit that it is his own fault for not realizing his potential because of his inner sense of inferiority. Walter regrets the decision to leave gray matter, but at the moment when he made this decision he was ruled by pride. Admitting this to himself would mean admitting his mistake, which Walter cannot do, so he blames others for his failure. When Walter learned of his terrible diagnosis, he refused Gretchen and Elliot's money, which could have paid for his expensive treatment. Walter's pride prevented him from doing so. In addition to his financial crisis, Walter is also going through a personal crisis. He has already lived 50 years, and doctors predict that he has no more than 2 more to go. He is plagued by the depressing feeling that his life may be over before he can finally fulfill himself. Not everyone thinks at every moment of his life's journey about what may die tomorrow, but from the moment Walter learned of the diagnosis he has thought about it constantly. He has not yet had time to give his children a quality education, he has not realized himself professionally, he has not gained universal respect. Once he suppressed his ambitions and accepted a mediocre but quiet and safe life, but inside he still thought he had done wrong, so Walter had no inner reconciliation with himself. The quiet life, in fact, was not. Circumstances have left a deep mark on Walter's character, and an end-of-life crisis has set in motion a process of changing priorities. All of Walter's decisions come through the filter of feelings of inferiority, resentment, and pride. As the story progresses, these feelings increasingly take over Walter. Heisenberg becomes his alter ego, and the hat symbolizes the transformation from a diligent and obedient man to a cruel and unprincipled one. Walter puts it on when he realizes that he will commit, by the standards of many people, but not himself, immoral acts. But next Walter doesn't need the hat at all. Heisenberg almost completely displaces Walter. How does this happen and why? After all, the actions that Heisenberg performs were not easy for Walter in the beginning, to put it mildly. The fact is that Walter and Heisenberg found it difficult to get along in one person, as they had different, if not opposing, moral values. By the end of his life Walter had come to terms with the fact that he and his family lived a modest, quiet and safe mediocre life. Walter avoided conflicts and preferred not to enter into them unnecessarily. Walter is not prone to risk, he puts the interests of his family above his own. The violent way of resolving conflicts is out of the question. When Walter enters the criminal world, he immediately encounters other participants in this business. Competition is not tolerated in this environment, so Walter's illusion that business can be conducted without violence is quickly shattered. Walter and Jesse are locked in the basement of Crazy 8's house. He poses a threat to them. So Walter has been instructed to kill him, but Walter doesn't have the inner strength to do it. He spends some time with Crazy 8 and at one point gets close to him, while looking within himself for reasons not to kill him. Walter thinks that if he does not kill Crazy 8, he will be spared and they will part in peace, but then Walter realizes that Crazy 8 is planning to use the shard from the plate as a murder weapon. Walter strangles Crazy 8 with a bicycle lock.
The moment I do, are you gonna stick me with that broken piece of plate?
This episode shows Walt that his past moral code is untenable. If Walter had continued to follow it, he probably would have been killed in the first season. After this, Walt realizes that he must act differently, and then Heisenberg enters the scene. Walter's moral code is rapidly superseded by Heisenberg's principles, as Heisenberg's moral code is more effective. But it is not enough to invent an alter ego, it is important to fill it with the qualities and characteristics that the first personality does not possess. Heisenberg has much to learn. Heisenberg is not satisfied with a mediocre life, he demands that things be the way he wants them to be and seeks to be treated with respect. Heisenberg often takes risks, but then sees that the risk was justified, so each time the stakes get higher and he gets into more and more dangerous situations. When Walter first invents Heisenberg in his head, the only thing that distinguishes him from Walt himself is determination, courage, and audacity. In creating Heisenberg, Walter is very selective and he fills him with different qualities gradually. You could say that Heisenberg absorbs a part of those he has killed. Almost every victory, psychological or physical, transforms him. The transformation makes him more violent, more unscrupulous, and, in a sense, more promising in the underworld.
You're goddamn right.
He takes his example from Tuco Salamanca. Just like Tuco, he shows himself to be aggressive and fights back against those who pose a threat to his reputation or his allies.
This is not meth.
Like gas ring, Heisenberg clearly distinguishes between criminal activity and a decent facade of law-abidingness.
You are a wealthy man now. And one must learn to be rich. To be poor, anyone can manage.
What advice do you have for me?
Never make the same mistake twice.
Heisenberg also embraces the more human characteristics and habits of his victims. As Crazy 8, Heisenberg cuts the crusts off of bread. Initially, Walter acted for the sake of his family, which was his first priority, but later a situation develops in which the interests of the family for Heisenberg become secondary. Walter realizes that his criminal activities provide for the family financially, but threaten their safety. Heisenberg solves this problem easily. He pushes his limits and allows himself to use people as a means to an end, even if they are people he loves, or they are people defenseless and unable to fight back. Heisenberg has done many cruel things, one of the cruelest being the poisoning of a child. Walter does exactly that for a number of reasons. He had been plotting to kill Fring for a long time, but he couldn't have done it without the accomplices in Jesse, at which time Jesse stopped having contact with Walter and increasingly went over to Gustavo and Mike's side. Walter needed to get Jesse on his side, but he knew that Jesse would not listen to his arguments, so his scheme of action becomes more complicated. Walter poisons Jesse's girlfriend's baby so that he thinks Gustavo did it. Walter resents Jesse for not wanting to work with him anymore. The fact that Fring sees Jesse's potential disadvantages him, because Walter started the whole thing in the first place so that people would see his potential, not someone else's. Walter perfectly understands Goose's intention, to make sure that Jesse learns to cook meth just as he did and begins to run the laboratory. But Walter can't allow that to happen. It's his pride and legacy. Walter doesn't want his unique product produced by anyone but him, can't stand the thought of being eliminated. Walt's sense of inferiority is connected, oddly enough, with his inflated ego. He believes that without him the business would cease to exist. This is not true. Huss's empire existed for many years before Walter came into it, and therefore would have continued to exist had Walter not intervened. Walter also kills Gus out of pride and resentment. He can't stand to be bossed around when he wants to be bossed around himself. Walter has indeed created a unique product, but pride clouds his judgment, drives him further and further, and eventually leads to his downfall. Walter is not a victim of circumstance, but a victim of himself, and under the influence of himself, he transforms from a shy, humble teacher to a scarred face. Walter has long deceived us and himself when he said that his goal was to provide for his family. It turned out that this motivation was secondary. All he wanted was to prove that he was the best, that no one could ever surpass him. And if anyone tried, he just wouldn't let it happen. Walter had always been this way. Circumstances and at least some morality had held him back. A terminal diagnosis and the constant feeling of a ticking clock had definitively removed the restraining framework. Heisenberg's moral code proved more effective in getting things done. Walter was not changed by circumstances, but they revealed his true nature. Only at the end does Walter tell the truth for once.
I liked it. I was good at it. And I was really
was alive.